Mom, figure it out. Not my problem you're sick. Those were the words my own daughter said before hanging up on me. I stared down at my phone for a long moment, then slowly smiled, because sitting in my hand was a lottery ticket worth $333 million. Ashley had just failed the most important test of her life, and she didn't even know it. If you're watching this, make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. You're probably wondering how a 67-year-old grandmother from Ohio ended up holding a fortune this size, and why she decided to test her own children like something out of a twisted fairy tale. Well, let me take you back to where this all began. 3 weeks ago, a quiet Tuesday morning that changed everything. My name is Sandra Williams, and for the last 15 years I've been playing the exact same lottery numbers. They weren't random numbers. They meant something. My late husband's birthday, our wedding anniversary, and the day my grandson Jake was born. Some people call that sentimental. Others call it foolish. My neighbor Frank always laughed about it. "Sandra," he'd say every time he saw me walking toward Miller's corner store, "the odds of winning the lottery are worse than getting struck by lightning while being eaten by a shark." But I kept buying the tickets anyway. Every week. That Tuesday started like any other. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my morning coffee, half watching the news when they began announcing the Mega Millions numbers. At first, I wasn't paying much attention. Then I heard the first number, 14. My eyes drifted toward the refrigerator where my ticket was held by a magnet. Then the next number, 23. My heart skipped. Then another, 31. My hand started shaking as I pulled the ticket off the fridge. Number after number matched. Every single one. All 6 numbers. I couldn't breathe. The jackpot was $333 million. Even after taxes, it was still more than $200 million, more money than I could possibly spend in 10 lifetimes. My first instinct was simple: call Derek, then Ashley, then my grandson Jake. Well, not so little anymore, he's 20 now. I wanted to share the miracle with the people I loved most in the world. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of last Christmas, when Ashley casually joked about finally getting a decent inheritance when the old lady kicks the bucket. Maybe it was Derek constantly suggesting that I should downsize because my house was too big for someone my age. Or maybe it was just intuition. Whatever it was, I decided to wait. For 3 weeks, I kept the secret. During that time, I met with lawyers, financial advisors, trust specialists. I organized everything carefully: trust funds, protection plans, estate arrangements. Then one day, an idea came to me: a test. If my children truly loved me, they would help me when I needed it most, even if they believed I had nothing left to give them. The test was simple. I would call each of them and tell them I needed help paying for my heart medication. The story wasn't entirely a lie. I do take heart medication, and it is expensive. But with my new fortune, money was no longer a problem. Love, however, that was about to become one. Ashley failed the test first. Her words were cold, impatient, and dismissive. "Mom, figure it out. Not my problem you're sick." Then the call ended. But as painful as that moment was, Derek's response somehow hurt even more. When I called him and explained the same situation, that I needed help covering my medication until my next Social Security check arrived, he didn't even let me finish speaking. "Mom," he sighed, using the same condescending tone he'd perfected ever since becoming a bank manager. "I can't keep enabling this behavior." I nearly laughed. Enabling? The woman who raised him and his sister alone after their father died, the woman who worked double shifts at the diner so they could go to college, the woman who secretly paid off his student loans 5 years ago, was now being lectured about money management. I kept my voice calm. "Derek, I'm not asking for much. just enough to cover my medication until my next Social Security check comes in. But he wasn't listening. Mom, this is exactly what Ashley and I were talking about. Ashley and I were talking about. So my children had been discussing my future behind my back. How thoughtful. Derek continued. You're getting older, Mom. Maybe it's time to start thinking about some changes. Have you looked into those senior communities we mentioned? They handle your medication, meals, everything. A retirement home. That was their solution. Not helping their mother, not supporting her, just moving her somewhere convenient. Let me think about it, I replied quietly. But inside, I already knew the truth. Still, Derek wasn't finished delivering his lecture.
Uncle Derek, what are you talking about? Jake asked, confusion replacing the smile on his face. I raised a hand gently. Jake, honey, why don't you sit down for a moment? He stepped into the living room slowly, wiping his wet hands on a towel, glancing between his mother and uncle like he'd just walked into the middle of a storm. Ashley folded her arms. Mom, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're acting irrationally. You stopped taking your medication to buy a car for a 20-year-old kid. Did I? I said calmly. The room went quiet. Derek frowned. You literally just said that. Yes, I nodded. I said it, but that doesn't make it true. Jake looked at me carefully. Grandma, what's going on? I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. 30 years of raising children had taught me patience, and right now, patience was the only thing keeping this room from exploding. You remember that lottery ticket on my refrigerator? I asked. Ashley rolled her eyes. Mom, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're acting irrationally. You've talked about that stupid ticket for weeks. It's not stupid, I replied softly. It's worth $333 million. The silence that followed felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. Ashley blinked. Derek laughed once, a short, nervous sound. Okay, that's not funny. I'm not joking, I said. I claimed it last month. Jake's towel dropped from his hands. Ashley stared at me like I'd grown a second head. That's impossible. I didn't tell anyone, I continued calmly, because before I made any decisions, I wanted to know something very important. Derek's voice lowered. What? I wanted to know which members of my family actually cared about me, and which ones cared about what I could give them. Ashley's face drained of color. You tested us? She whispered. Yes, I said simply. Derek scoffed. That's ridiculous. Is it? I looked at him. When I called you for help with medication, what did you say? He shifted uncomfortably. You told me to call Ashley. I turned to my daughter. And when I called you, what did you say? Ashley didn't answer. I believe your exact words were, figure it out, Mom. Not my problem, you're sick. Jake looked at his mother slowly. Ashley's voice cracked. That's not fair. I thought you were exaggerating. You always do that. And Derek blocked my number, I added quietly. Derek's jaw tightened. But Jake, I said, turning toward my grandson, Jake offered me every dollar he had. Jake shook his head. Grandma, I was just trying to help. You offered $500, your entire savings, and you were ready to drive 400 miles just to make sure I was okay. Jake looked embarrassed. Ashley suddenly stood up. So what? That doesn't mean you buy him a car. No, I said calmly. It means he proved something the rest of you didn't. Derek crossed his arms. You're seriously going to divide your entire fortune based on one phone call? Not one phone call, a lifetime of behavior that phone call simply confirmed. Ashley's face laughed bitterly. This is insane. Maybe, I replied, but here's the part you're really not going to like. Both of them stared at me. I've already met with lawyers. Derek's face went pale. Ashley sat back down slowly. What does that mean? It means my will is finished, I said. Jake looked alarmed. Grandma, you don't have to. I smiled at him. Relax, sweetheart. You're not the reason this conversation is happening. I turned back to my children. You both made it very clear that when your mother needed help, you considered her a burden. That's not what we meant, Ashley's voice sharpened. It's exactly what you meant, I replied. Derek rubbed his forehead. So now what, you cut us off? No, I said. They both looked relieved for half a second. Not completely. Their relief vanished. Jake's education will be fully paid for. Graduate school too, if he wants it. Jake opened his mouth. Grandma, I added with a smile, and the car is just the beginning. Ashley's hands clenched. As for you two, I continued calmly, I've created a trust. Derek frowned. A trust? Yes, one that will provide you with assistance if you ever truly need it. Ashley narrowed her eyes. And what's the catch? I leaned forward slightly. The catch is that neither of you control it. The room went still. Jake does. Jake's head snapped toward me. What? Ashley exploded. You're putting my son in charge of my money? No, I corrected gently. I'm putting a kind, responsible human being in charge of making sure my money helps people who actually deserve it. Derek stared at Jake like he'd never seen him before. And if either of you ever treat me the way you did last week again, I added quietly, you won't see a single dollar. Ashley's voice trembled with anger. You're choosing him over your own children. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. You made that choice yourselves.
Jake blinked slowly, his eyes moving from my face to the piece of paper in my hand. The kitchen, which had been buzzing with tension only moments ago, went completely silent. I held the ticket between my fingers, letting the moment stretch just long enough for everyone to feel the weight of it. Jake sighed if I was joking. I'd say, that explains the car, he finally said with a small, uncertain laugh. Across the room, Derek scoffed. Mom, be serious. How much could you have won? A few thousand? Maybe 10,000? I smiled. Try again. Ashley stopped crying almost instantly. Her tears dried as quickly as they had appeared, curiosity replacing them like a switch had been flipped. What do you mean, try again? She asked. Instead of answering, I walked to the refrigerator and carefully removed the lottery ticket that had been hanging there for the past 3 weeks. It had looked so ordinary all that time, just a small slip of paper held up by a magnet shaped like a sunflower. But there was nothing ordinary about it. I placed it on the kitchen table. Jake leaned forward first, studying the numbers. Derek followed, squinting like he thought he might catch me in some kind of trick. Ashley slowly moved closer, her designer handbag sliding off her shoulder as she stared at the ticket, like it might vanish if she blinked. Mom, Derek said impatiently, just tell us the amount. I folded my hands calmly. $333 million. For a moment, no one breathed. Ashley's mouth fell open. Derek blinked, once, twice, then laughed loudly. Okay, that's funny. Seriously, though. I am serious, I said. Jake looked up at me, his face pale with shock. Grandma, that's Powerball-level money. It certainly is. Ashley grabbed the ticket and began examining it frantically, as if she might discover it was fake. This can't be real. It is very real. Verified. Claimed. Deposited. Derek staggered back and dropped into a chair. 333 million? Jake sat back slowly, processing. Then he looked at me again. You knew when you called them for help. I did. You already had the money. Yes, and you wanted to see what they'd do. I nodded. Ashley suddenly slammed the ticket back onto the table. That's insane. You tricked us? Like lab rats? No, Ashley, I said calmly. I gave you an opportunity. Derek rubbed his temples. Mom, if you had that kind of money, why on earth would you call us saying you couldn't afford medication? Because, I said evenly, I wanted to know something before deciding what to do with it. Jake already knew the answer. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward his mother and uncle.
You wanted to know who actually cared about you. Exactly. Ashley's voice rose again. You tricked us. You made us look like villains. No, Ashley, I said calmly. You managed that on your own. The room fell quiet again. Derek finally looked up at me with a new expression on his face now, one I hadn't seen before. Hope. So, what happens now? He asked carefully. Ashley straightened her posture, suddenly composed again. Yes, Mom. What happens now? Jake watched them both, and I could see the disappointment in his eyes. They weren't thinking about their behavior. They were thinking about the money. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the kitchen, the same room where I had packed school lunches, helped with homework, and celebrated birthdays for decades. So far, I said, I've given Jake a car. Jake immediately shook his head. Grandma, I didn't help you for that. I know, that's exactly why you received it. Ashley quickly spoke up. Mom, we're your children. Surely you're not going to... Oh, don't worry, I interrupted gently. I have plans for both of you as well. Derek and Ashley exchanged a hopeful glance. Jake, however, looked concerned. What kind of plans? He asked. I smiled. The kind that reveal character. Ashley frowned. What does that mean? I stood and picked up the folder from my desk. The lottery win was only phase 1. Derek looked confused. Phase 1? I placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly. Phase 2, I said calmly, is deciding who deserves to be part of my future. Ashley's hopeful expression faltered. Derek's jaw tightened. Jake watched them both, and I could see the disappointment in his eyes. They weren't thinking about their behavior. They were thinking about the money. And for the first time that evening, my children looked nervous. I handed the ticket to Jake. Read the numbers, sweetheart. Jake studied the paper for a moment. His eyes moved slowly from one line to the next. Then he looked at me, back at the ticket, and suddenly all the color drained from his face. Grandma, these are the winning numbers for the Mega Millions jackpot from 3 weeks ago, I finished gently. $333 million. Derek lunged forward, reaching for the ticket, but Jake instinctively pulled it back. Uncle Derek, don't. Let me see that, Ashley demanded sharply, leaning over the table. I raised my hand, stopping both of them. The ticket is just a souvenir now, I said calmly. The money has already been claimed, invested, and placed in several trusts. Then I leaned back in my chair and watched. The silence that followed was beautiful. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Ashley's face shifted from pale to red and then back to pale again. $200 million, Derek whispered. Give or take a few million, depending on how the investments are performing this week, I replied with a small smile. It's amazing how quickly money grows when you start with that much capital. Ashley was the first to recover enough to speak. Mom, we had no idea. When you called asking for help, if you'd known I was rich, you would have helped me, I asked quietly. She froze. Ashley, listen to what you're saying. You would have helped your own mother if you knew there was something in it for you? That's not what I meant, she rushed to say. Isn't it? I turned slowly toward Derek. Let me ask you something, son. If I were still living on my little Social Security check and I truly needed help paying for my medication, would you help me? Derek opened his mouth. Then he hesitated. That pause told me everything. I see. I stood up from the table, suddenly feeling older than I had a moment ago. Well, I said softly, I think this conversation has been very illuminating. Mom, wait, Ashley said quickly, panic creeping into her voice. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out how to move forward as a family. We? I raised an eyebrow. Ashley, 20 minutes ago you hung up on me when I said I needed help. Derek blocked my number, and now suddenly we're talking about family? Jake was still staring at the ticket as if it might vanish if he blinked. Grandma, I can't accept the car, he said quietly. Not if, I mean, this is too much. And right then, in that single moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this young man was the only person in the room who truly deserved anything I had. But Derek and Ashley were about to learn just how expensive greed can be. Jake, sweetheart, I said gently, squeezing his hand, when you thought I was struggling, you offered me everything you had. I smiled at him. That car isn't charity, it's a thank you gift from someone who can finally afford to say thank you properly. Derek had moved past shock and straight into desperation. Mom, okay, we handled this wrong, he said quickly, but we're family. Families work through things. Do they? I asked calmly. I looked straight at him. Derek, in the 3 weeks since I won the lottery, how many times have you called just to check on me? He said nothing. How many times has Ashley? They exchanged a quick glance. We've been busy, Ashley said weakly. But Jake called me twice this week, just to chat, to tell me about his classes, to ask about my garden, to see if I needed anything. Then I looked back at my grandson, and when I said I needed help, what did you do? I offered to drive down immediately, Jake said quietly. With your last $500, I added. I turned back to Derek and Ashley. Meanwhile, the two of you, people I've helped financially for years, told me to figure it out myself and suggested putting me in assisted living. Derek ran both hands through his hair. Okay, yes, we made mistakes, he admitted, but you have to understand the position we're in. Money's been tight. Ashley's raising kids on her own. I've got bills. Derek. My voice cut through the room like glass. Stop. Just stop. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. Do you know what I did during the 3 weeks while I was planning this little test? Neither of them spoke. I hired a private investigator. Ashley's face went ghost white. Derek actually took a step backward. You had us investigated? He said hoarsely. You had my financial exposure investigated, I corrected calmly. You see, when you suddenly have this kind of money, you need to make sure your assets are protected from people who might take advantage of your generosity. I opened the folder and began flipping through the neatly organized documents. The report was very thorough. Jake looked back and forth between his mother and his uncle like he was watching a tennis match. What did it say? He asked quietly. Well, I said, pulling out the first sheet, it turns out both of my children have been living well beyond their means for years. I glanced at Derek. Your motorcycle payment alone is $600 a month. Then I turned to Ashley, and your spa visits average $400 every month. I pulled out another page. Between the two of you, you spent nearly $2,000 at restaurants last month. Their silence filled the room. All those designer clothes, the expensive hobbies, the weekend trips, the luxury purchases. I closed the folder and looked directly at them. All of it funded with credit cards and occasional bailouts from dear old Mom. I pulled a neatly organized spreadsheet from the folder beside me and slid it across the coffee table. My voice was calm, steady in a way that made the tension in the room feel even heavier. Over the past 5 years, I said, tapping the paper gently, I've given or loaned your mother and your uncle a combined total of $63,000. Neither of them spoke. Not one penny, I continued, has ever been repaid. Ashley's mouth opened immediately. We would have paid you back. With what money? I interrupted softly. You're both barely managing your minimum payments as it is. The words landed like stones in water. I closed the folder slowly. But here's the interesting part, I added, folding my hands in my lap. The investigator I hired didn't just look into the financials. Across the room, Derek tightened his grip on the back of the sofa. His knuckles turned white. What else? He asked. I met his eyes. Your conversations about my estate. Silence swallowed the room.
Apparently, I continued, you've both been quite vocal at family gatherings, discussing how much this house might be worth, how my life insurance policy would solve a lot of your financial problems, and how it would be such a relief when I finally... I paused, letting the words hang. What was the phrase you used, Ashley? Her face had already begun to drain of color. Oh yes, I said gently, stopped being a burden and made you both rich. The silence afterward was absolute. Somewhere in the hallway, the old grandfather clock ticked loudly, marking each second like a judge's gavel. Jake slowly stood up. You said that about Grandma? He asked quietly, staring at his mother. Mom, how could you? But I wasn't finished. The real revelation, I said, leaning back in my chair, was only just beginning. I picked up another document. The investigator also discovered that Derek has been telling people I'm developing dementia. My son's face crumbled before my eyes. Apparently, I continued, you've been laying the groundwork to challenge my mental competency in case I ever decided to change my will. Jake spun toward him. Uncle Derek, please tell me that's not true. Derek didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. Oh, but it gets better, I said, pulling out another sheet of paper. Ashley, you've been researching guardianship laws. Ashley's head snapped up. Not out of concern for my well-being, I added calmly, but because you learned that if I were declared incompetent, you and Derek could gain control of my assets as my closest relatives. Ashley's face went from red to gray. Mom, that's not... Save it, dear. I lifted my phone and held it up. Amazing what technology can do these days. The investigator gathered quite a comprehensive file on both of you. Derek's voice was barely more than a whisper. You had us followed? I documented my children's behavior toward their elderly mother. Yes, including the conversation where you both discussed how much easier your lives would be if I had a stroke or heart attack. I placed the phone gently back on the table. That one was particularly enlightening. Jake sank into the chair across from me. I think I'm going to be sick, he muttered. I reached over and patted his hand. Don't worry, sweetheart. The good news is that your inheritance is perfectly secure. I smiled warmly at him. The bad news, for your mother and uncle, is that I've taken several steps to protect myself and my assets from future manipulation. Derek finally found his voice. What kind of steps? Well, I said proudly, first I had myself thoroughly examined by 3 different physicians and a psychiatrist. Every single one of them declared me completely mentally competent. I gestured toward the folder. Those reports are on file with my lawyers, along with detailed video testimonies explaining my decision-making process. I allowed myself a small smile. I was rather proud of my thoroughness. I lifted a second finger. Second, I restructured my entire estate. Jake looked up. You're now my sole heir. Ashley made a strangled sound that echoed through the room. And third, I continued, savoring the moment, I've decided to have a little fun with my newfound wealth. Both of my children stared at me. Derek, Ashley, I folded my hands again. You're about to experience firsthand what it feels like to lose everything. Ashley swallowed hard. What do you mean? You'll find out soon enough. Your creditors received some very interesting phone calls this morning. The color drained from both their faces instantly. Mom, Derek, what did you do? I paid off all your debts. Ashley grabbed Derek's arm. Wait, that's good news, right? Mom, thank you. Oh no, dear. I leaned back comfortably. I didn't pay them off as gifts. Confusion flickered across their faces. I bought them. Derek blinked. What? I purchased every single one of your debts from your creditors. Derek's motorcycle loan, Ashley's credit cards, both your car loans. I tapped the folder. All of it. Derek shook his head.
You can't do that. There are laws about predatory lending, family exploitation. Actually, I said calmly, there aren't any laws against purchasing legally held debt, even from family members. I shrugged slightly. My lawyers assure me it's completely legal. Unusual, perhaps, but legal. Jake looked between all of us. Grandma, what does this mean? It means, I said gently, that your mother and uncle now owe me instead of their banks. Ashley's voice trembled. How much? I glanced at my paperwork. Derek, the debt I purchased totals $47,000. He swallowed. Ashley, yours comes to $52,000. I paused. And then there's the $63,000 the two of you borrowed from me over the years. I ran the numbers one final time, which means Derek now owes $78,000. I shifted my eyes to Ashley. And you owe $89,000. Derek collapsed on the sofa. That's impossible. Oh, and there are the new terms, I added casually. Both heads snapped up. 24% annual interest, compounded monthly. Ashley's eyes filled with tears. Full balance due in 30 days, or I begin legal collection proceedings. We don't have that kind of money, she whispered. I know. I folded my hands. Derek's savings account currently contains $1,200. Ashley's roughly $800. I had done my homework. So let's discuss your options. What options? Derek asked hoarsely. You can liquidate assets, Derek. Sell the motorcycle. If you're lucky, maybe $15,000. Ashley, sell your car and buy something cheaper. That might free up $10,000. I counted calmly on my fingers. You could both take second jobs, work evenings, weekends. I tilted my head slightly. That might cover perhaps a third of what you owe. Tears streamed down Ashley's face. There has to be another way. I smiled sweetly. Actually, there is. Both of them looked at me desperately. You can ask family for help. I let the words sit in the air. After all, family supports each other, doesn't it? That's what you told me I should rely on. The irony filled the room like smoke. Mom, please, Derek whispered. I know we messed up. I know we treated you badly, but we're your children. We can fix this. I studied him for a long moment. Can you? Because I've been waiting years for you to make things right. Instead, you just kept taking. Ashley suddenly straightened. Mom, what if we worked for you? I raised an eyebrow. We could help manage things, she rushed on. Assist you with finances, take care of the house. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Ashley, I said softly, you want to work for me? She nodded quickly. The same daughter who told me my health problems weren't her concern suddenly wants to become my caretaker? She had no answer. Across the room, Derek had started making frantic phone calls, trying to reach anyone who might help them. I watched him calmly, like observing a laboratory experiment. Finally, I asked, Derek, who exactly are you calling? He didn't look at me. Anyone who might help us. He swallowed hard. Friends, extended family, people from work.
And what are you telling them? I asked calmly. Derek paused, the realization creeping across his face as he saw the trap closing around him. I'm telling them we need financial help. I gave a slow nod. Just like I needed help with my medication. Silence fell over the room. I wonder, I continued thoughtfully, how many of them will tell you to figure it out yourselves. Jake had been quiet the entire time, watching the exchange unfold with a sharpness that reminded me so much of his grandfather. Finally, he spoke. Mom, Uncle Derek, why don't you just apologize? They both turned to look at him. Really apologize, Jake continued firmly. Not just say sorry because you got caught. Derek lowered his phone slowly. I am sorry, Jake, he said. We both are. I tilted my head.
Sorry for what specifically? I asked. I'd like to hear you say it. Derek's jaw tightened. We're sorry for not helping you when you asked. And, I prompted, and for taking your money without paying it back over the years, he added reluctantly. And, I repeated. Ashley jumped in quickly. And for saying mean things about you behind your back. I gave a small, approving nod. Getting warmer? What else? Derek's shoulders sagged as if the weight of the truth had finally become too heavy to carry. For planning to have you declared incompetent so we could control your money. And, I said again, his voice dropped lower. For discussing how much easier our lives would be if you died. The words spilled out in a rush, like a bandage being ripped off a wound that had been festering for years. I nodded slowly. Very good, I said. Now, was that so hard? Ashley leaned forward anxiously. Does this mean you'll help us? Help you what? I asked. Pay debts you legitimately owe? Why would I do that? I tilted my head slightly and looked straight at her. Ashley, when I needed help with my medication, what did you tell me? Her face crumpled. I told you to figure it out. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair. So now I'm telling both of you the same thing. Figure it out. Just then, Derek's phone rang. He snatched it up desperately. Hello? Yes, this is Derek Williams. A pause. No, we're not asking for money for drugs or gambling. We need help with legitimate debts. Another pause. This one was longer. His expression slowly shifted from hope to confusion to disbelief. What do you mean? What have I done to deserve help? I'm family. The voice on the other end grew louder. Derek pulled the phone away from his ear. Then the call disconnected. They hung up, he said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. How strange, I said. Family refusing to help family in need. I swirled my champagne glass thoughtfully. Who would do such a thing? But I wasn't finished with my lesson yet. In fact, the best part was still coming. Derek, Ashley, I have a confession to make. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. When I returned, I was carrying a chilled bottle of champagne. I've been planning this moment for 3 weeks, I said as I popped the cork with practiced ease. The sharp pop echoed through the silent room. And I think it calls for a celebration. Jake watched carefully as I poured myself a glass. Grandma, what exactly are you celebrating? I lifted the glass slightly. The fact that your mother and uncle are about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. Ashley looked at me in confusion. Mom, Uncle Derek, what are you talking about? Sit down, I said calmly. Both of you. I want to tell you about the rest of my plans. I settled comfortably back into my chair. You see, buying your debts was only the beginning. Derek gripped Ashley's hand. What do you mean, the beginning? Well, Derek, remember your friend Mike from the bank? The one you've been telling about my supposed dementia? Derek went perfectly still. What kind of research? He asked cautiously. The kind that involves public records, lottery winner databases, and financial filings. The room seemed to shrink around them. Mike discovered something very interesting. I let the silence stretch before delivering the final piece. He found out about my lottery win. Ashley whispered faintly, No. Oh, yes. And Mike, being the upstanding citizen he is, shared this fascinating information with several people at the bank. By now, everyone in your professional circles knows that Derek and Ashley Williams' mother won $300 million, and they were trying to have her declared incompetent so they could steal it. Derek's face had gone ghost white. They don't know the whole story, he muttered. Don't they? I replied calmly, because the story they heard is this. A loving mother helped her children financially for years. She won the lottery, and instead of being grateful, they plotted to have her committed so they could take her money. I took another slow sip. How do you think that story is playing at your workplaces? Ashley began crying again. Mom, Derek's job, my reputation, everyone will think exactly what they should think, that you are greedy, ungrateful people who tried to take advantage of your elderly mother. Jake stared at me wide-eyed. Grandma, you orchestrated all of this, didn't you? I smiled slightly. Orchestrated is such a dramatic word. I simply allowed your mother and uncle to reveal their true colors, and then made sure the appropriate people knew about it. Jake leaned forward slowly. Grandma, what are you leaving me? I looked directly at him and raised my glass again. Jake, would you like to know what you're inheriting? His eyes widened. All of it? Every penny. But more importantly, you're inheriting something your mother and uncle will never have again. I held my glass in the air. A family member who trusts you completely. Across the room, Derek and Ashley sat frozen, realizing the full weight of what they had lost. The trust documents were signed this morning, and by the time the lawyers finish filing everything, there will be absolutely nothing either of you can do about it. Money, after all, was never the real loss. What they had destroyed was something far more valuable: trust. And once that is gone, no fortune in the world can ever buy it back.
Jake receives everything when I pass away, but that's not all. I've also established a college fund that will cover his education all the way through graduate school, along with a living allowance that ensures he'll never have to worry about money while he focuses on studying and building his future. Jake sat there, completely speechless, but Derek quickly found his voice. Mom, you can't just cut us out completely, he said, disbelief written all over his face. We're your children. You were my children, I corrected gently. Now you're simply people who happen to share my DNA and my last name. Being family requires more than biology, Derek. It requires love, respect, and basic human decency. Ashley's breathing became rapid, almost frantic. What about our futures? She demanded. We have nothing now. You have exactly what you gave me when I needed help, I replied calmly. Nothing. I walked over to my desk and pulled out one final document. However, I continued, I'm not completely heartless. I've made arrangements for both of you. Derek's head snapped up. What kind of arrangements? I've arranged for you to have jobs. I handed him the paper. Derek, there's a dishwashing position available at Miller's Diner, the same diner where I used to work double shifts to pay for your college. It's minimum wage, but it's honest work. Derek stared at the application like it was written in a language he couldn't understand. And Ashley, I continued, turning to her, I spoke with the manager at the local grocery store. They're hiring for the overnight stocking shift. Again, minimum wage, but it's steady employment. Ashley's voice shot up in disbelief. You want us to work minimum wage jobs? I want you to understand what it feels like to work for every dollar, while the people you love treat you as if you're worthless. I sat back down, feeling lighter than I had in years. Consider it character building. Jake finally found his voice. Grandma, I don't even know what to say. Then say this, I told him gently. Say you'll use this money wisely. Say you'll remember that wealth doesn't make you better than anyone else. It simply gives you more responsibility to be kind. I reached over and squeezed his hand. And promise me you'll never take family for granted the way your mother and uncle did. I promise, he whispered, tears filling his eyes. Derek made one final desperate attempt. Mom, please, we'll do anything. We'll pay you back every penny. We'll apologize publicly. Derek, stop. I raised my hand, cutting him off. You'll do those things because you got caught, not because you're truly sorry. And there's a difference. I stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the garden I had spent 30 years tending. "You know what's funny," I said, quietly. "If you had just helped me when I asked, if you had shown even the smallest amount of kindness to the woman who gave you life, none of this would have happened." I paused. "I would have shared my fortune gladly." Ashley's voice trembled. "We can start over," she pleaded. "We can be the family you want us to be." I turned around and looked at the two people I had raised, the two people who had shared my holidays, my home, my love, and who had taken all of it for granted. "No," I said simply, "you can't, because I finally learned something important. You can't buy love, but you can absolutely put a price on greed, and both of you have shown me exactly what that price is." Jake stood up and wrapped his arms around me. "Thank you, Grandma," he said softly, "for everything, for the test, for the lesson, and for trusting me." As Derek and Ashley walked out of my house for the last time, I felt something I hadn't in years: complete peace. My grandson had everything he needed for a bright and secure future, and I had finally learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to keep enabling the people who take your love for granted. The lottery had given me money, but my children had given me something far more valuable: the knowledge of who truly deserved my trust, and that was worth every single penny.